Welcome to the Administration and Finance, Recreation and Parks Committee meeting for February 14th, 2023. And happy Valentine's Day to everyone. Council members who are present, Council Member Michael Palermo, Council Member Peter Vanstrom, Council Member Sarah Beeson, Council Member G. Lee Hills, Council Member William Morthland. The purpose of committee meetings are for the city departments to convey information to the mayor and city council and discuss initiatives listed on the published agenda, as well as provide updates of vital information essential to the operation of city government. By ordinance, the committee consists of the mayor, members of city council, and city administrator, and for purposes of committee meetings, the city administrator serves as the chair of these meetings. This is a public meeting, but not a public hearing. While the meeting is certainly open to the public, we do not take public comments unless specifically authorized by mayor and council. Public comments or questions are received at the regular city council meetings on the second and fourth Monday of each month and the fifth Monday of each month in open forum. We do encourage citizens to engage our online platforms, and if you have any questions or need information, please reach out to our staff who is available to provide that information to you. We'd also encourage you to access the city website and the city web service portal as a mechanism to report any issues or concerns. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for the Administration and Finance, Recreation and Parks Committee meeting for January 10th, 2023. I'll entertain a motion of approval of those minutes. Motion by Councilmember Vanstrom, second by Councilmember Beeson. Any further discussions? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you. Passes unanimously. I would ask at the outset of our meeting, and I perhaps should have done this prior to the minutes, I would ask that if there are no objections from the committee, that items number 4 under administration and item number 8 under finance, that we defer those items in order to provide additional information to the elected body. And so I'd entertain a motion if that is commensurate with elected body's decision.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Vanstrom, second by Councilmember Palermo. Any further question on those items? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Item number 2 under administration, consideration of a text amendment to amend Article 2.5 Code of Ethics, Section 2.5.3 Prohibitions of the City of Roswell Code of Ordinances to update the Ethics Code to clearly identify situations to avoid the appearance of impropriety when council members vote on zoning applications that directly profit their campaign donors. Mr. Fisher.
I think this is in interest of the council or the council/committee to update this, and I'll just open it up at this point for any questions that you may have or comments.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Fisher. So this is an item where I really appreciated the support last year, that basically a year ago we came to a voluntary agreement where each member of this council had signed that basically they were going to follow this, which is basically to at a really high level is just bottom line is if a council member knowingly has received money from someone that's profiting off of a development application, that they would recuse themselves instead of voting on that development application. And the resolution also was that after 1 year of following it, which again I really appreciate this council for all agreeing to last year, that after 1 year it would become basically codified and turned in from a resolution into an actual ordinance updating our code. And so I definitely support moving this forward and following through with exactly what we said and voted and signed that we would do last year.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Palermo. Any further discussion? Yes, Councilmember Beeson.
I have a question for clarification. Is it my understanding that the language is only relevant to council members and not mayor and council because zoning matters go directly to council and does not go through committee?
I guess help me out. Can you clarify that question?
So for example, we're in committee tonight. I kind of wish Mayor Wilson was here. Normally, Mayor Wilson is able to vote, or any mayor is able to vote during committee, and he's only a tiebreaker during our council meetings. Is that the reason why it's only relevant to council and not mayor? Because I'm curious as to why it's not inclusive of all voting members.
Yeah, great question. So yes, so any zoning application comes straight to council. And when originally kind of creating the logic, a key concern that was expressed in the community was the fact that every developer, every applicant, of course, has the right to a hearing. And so therefore, hypothetically, in reality, this probably does not happen, but hypothetically, what if there was a developer that gave money to every single elected official? In which case, theoretically, if all 7 were recusing themselves, there's no hearing. There needs to be they deserve the right of a hearing. In which case, within the proposal, there's kind of logic that involves unrecusing yourself. In which case, that's where the realization ultimately that a mayor would be someone that's not a voting member, and the fact that they would. By having them recuse themselves, all you're doing is moving somebody else into a role where they're not making a vote. So that was the thought process on it. Yep.
Understood. Thank you for clarity.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you. Any further question or comment regarding this item?
Clarification too, although of course when this was passed last year, it was just a committee and then one single council meeting, because a resolution just requires one council meeting. This would be an actual ordinance, which means there'd be a first reading and a second reading. And so if committee supports moving this out, which I certainly hope the committee supports, there'd be a first reading and then a second reading. And if that second reading passes, then that means it's an updated ordinance within our city of Roswell. And so we'll have two more times to discuss this, and I do plan on probably discussing in greater detail at a council meeting where we hopefully have more than one resident. But with that, I motion to move this to the council.
All right, motion and,
Sure. Second.
all right, motion by Councilmember Palermo, second by Councilmember Hills. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, moving this item forward. Thank you, passes unanimously. Item number 3, consideration for the mayor and/or city administrator to sign contracts for municipal architects and engineering consulting for general facilities maintenance, roofing and mechanical, electrical, and plumbing with Raymond Engineering, Georgia Incorporated, and Croft and Associates Incorporated. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Knighton. This is standby trade contractors that we've been working through. Our purchasing department has been working through for quite some time to try to get people on vendors on a list to try to narrow the time that it takes to be able to do certain jobs. So if we have a big roofing job or something and we have to go out and get an engineer, we already have one now on standby, as we do many different standby trades. Roofing, it would be an example of one of the engineers would be for a roofing, instead of having to go out, get an engineer, then have them come in and design it, and then go back out for a vendor to do the job. We already have the contractors in place. For the engineering, there's 2 different ones. There's Raymond Engineering of Georgia and Croft and Associates, Inc. are 2 of them that were chosen based off of the responses that we've got. So we're asking to sign standby contracts for those 2 engineering groups.
All right, thank you, Mr. Fisher. Do you have any question, comment from the committee? Seeing none, we'll entertain a motion to move this item forward. Motion by Councilmember Morthland, second by Councilmember Vanstrom. Any further questions or comment? Seeing none, all in favor? All right, passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Item 4, of course, is deferred, and we'll move to finance, and we have several items there. And if there's no objection from the committee, we'll handle item number 6, presentation of the FY 2023 second quarter investment report. If that is okay, no objection there first. All right. Item number 6, presentation of the FY 2023 second quarter investment report. We have Mr. Luckett who will lead this discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Knighton. Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is our second quarter investment report. And before I get started, I wanted to introduce to you Scott Stitcher. Scott is with PFM Asset Management. They're the investment advisory firm that the city hired back in 2020. And he's here tonight to assist in talking to you all about our second quarter investment performance. Just to give you a little bit of background, when we hired PFM, that was the first time the city had ever had an investment advisory firm in helping to manage the city's portfolio. And as part of that, we transitioned a portion of our portfolio over to PFM to manage on our behalf. The city still retained a portion, and we're still there today with the intention of continuing to progress in terms of transitioning more and more of our portfolio over to PFM to help us manage those assets. So with that, I'm going to walk us through our investment report, and what this report will show you is the entire portfolio investment. When I'm done with this, I'm going to turn it over to Scott, and he is going to talk to you about the portion of the portfolio that PFM manages on our behalf, as well as give you some market update on how things are going currently in the market. So with that, so just as a reminder, every time we present our investment report, I like to remind you all that the city does have an investment policy that's approved by the mayor and council, and the priority of that policy in terms of our investments include safety, compliance, liquidity, and income in priority order. Looking at the overall portfolio, as you can see at the bottom of the report, as of December 22, our second quarter of our fiscal year, the city's portfolio had an overall yield of 275 basis points. And we compare that to the one-year treasury, which at that point was at 4.47%. As you can see over the course of the last year, the city's portfolio has grown in terms of yield by over 200 basis points. And we know that's because of a lot of the Fed funds, Federal Reserve rate increases that have occurred over the last year. So you can see that 200 basis point increase has given the city a huge advantage when it comes to interest earnings. And so the difference there, just over the course of a year, is a difference of about $4 million in interest earnings when you look at the overall portfolio value of our portfolio. This next page gives you the last 12 months history in graphical form of the city's portfolio yield when compared to that one-year treasury. At the bottom, we have a pie chart that kind of gives you an idea of all the different investment vehicles that the city's portfolio utilizes. So you can see that starting at the top right, Georgia Fund 1 is a local government investment pool that the city is able to utilize. It's very short in terms of its maturity, so it's a liquid investment vehicle for the city. Bank deposits as of the second quarter were made up about 16% of the total portfolio. A money market account, 9%. Federal agency bonds, 33%. U.S. Treasury bonds at 12%. CDs at 8%. And municipal bonds less than 1%. The next page kind of gives you a little more detail about where the city's funds are invested. So you can see the overall portfolio as of the second quarter was at $187 million. And you can see that that's, like I've already mentioned, that's spread across our bank deposits, Georgia Fund 1, CDs, and various agency bonds. At the bottom of this page, you also see a 12-month history of our total portfolio, as well as where those funds have been invested. And then on the next page, at the top, this gives you an idea of the liquidity of our overall portfolio. So the average length to maturity for our overall portfolio is 1.95 years. You can see those first three lines, Georgia Fund 1, bank deposits, and our money market account have we can access those funds within 1 day. And then the remaining items there, we can see that we're invested as far out as about 4.5 years down to 1.5 years. So overall, about almost 2 years average length to maturity. And at the bottom of this page, this kind of gives you a graphical representation of the dollar amount that falls into those various buckets over the next 5 years. And then finally, the last few pages of our report just kind of give you a detailed listing of all the various investment vehicles that we are invested in. And with that, I'm going to pull up the report.
Does that work?
It doesn't.
It doesn't work. You mind doing that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So with this is the investment report for the portion of our portfolio managed by PFM. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott Stitcher, and he'll walk you through what that looks like.
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate it. It's good to see everyone. It's nice to be with you this evening. So as Ryan said, a little over 2 years ago, Ryan took the prudent step to enhance the city's investment program, implementing industry best practices, updating the city's investment policy, hiring an independent third-party custodian, performing a cash flow analysis to help identify some of the city's assets that could be invested longer term to maximize return and yield. And we were fortunate enough to be chosen to be that firm to maximize or attempt to maximize investment return and yield. Now, little did Ryan know that at the time he was going to go down this path, that the Fed would also embark on their most aggressive tightening campaign in history. So that's sort of the bad news, because when interest rates go up, bond prices go down. That's the bad news, was the timing that Ryan implemented this idea. The good news is we're not trying to time the market. We are trying to be in the market. Time in the market is going to serve the city well, and Ryan has built a great foundation in which to, again, maximize return and yield on these assets over the long term. Okay, so Ryan also mentioned earlier that the city's philosophy is safety, compliance, liquidity, and yield. Our approach is done, everything we do is done within the parameters set by Georgia code, which again places the utmost importance on safety and liquidity of the assets, and then as well as your investment policy. Those are the two things that drive what we do on your behalf. And you can see our approach is really just understanding your needs, but taking a very safe, methodical approach, utilizing high quality fixed income securities to meet your investment program needs. Okay, I'm going to make some high level comments on the current market. As I mentioned, when we went down this path, the Fed started on a very aggressive tightening campaign. Last year, the key theme was inflation, persistent inflation, and the Fed was in full inflation fighting mode. They raised interest rates 7 times to the tune of 4.25%. They've already raised interest rates 1 time in 2023, another 25 basis points. And as I mentioned earlier, a rising rate environment is not ideal for a long-term fixed income investor in the short term. Long term, it serves a long-term investor quite well in the form of higher yield, higher income. And we're working in that direction. I'll share some numbers with you on that front here a little bit later. The thought process is the Fed is nearing the end of this tightening campaign. The thought was that they might have one more in them this year. I think after the last employment report and today's CPI reading, the thought process now is there may be 2 more rate hikes, albeit at a lower pace, lower and slower pace, but 2 more potentially could occur this year. The other thought was that the Fed might actually begin to lower interest rates this year. We're not in that camp. We don't think there's anything out there that would allow the Fed to begin cutting interest rates in 2023. And that's pretty consistent with what you've heard from the Fed, which is that they are going to remain higher for longer. And we are kind of in agreement with them that we're going to see this high interest rate environment for a longer period of time. Let me stop there to see if there's any thoughts on what I've shared with you thus far. If not, we'll jump in. Okay, thank you. Quickly, just looking at the yield environment. On the left, for those of you more quantitatively oriented, you can see yields across the Treasury yield curve, and then we show it graphically over to the right. And what you note is that yields on the short end of the curve are much higher than those on the long end of the curve. And even during the quarter over quarter, you saw the short end of the yield curve increase, and actually what we call the belly of the curve, that 3 to 5 year space, we actually saw yields fall. And that's good news, because that's in this portfolio, that's kind of the part of the curve where we are purchasing securities on your behalf. So when interest rates fall, bond prices go up. So that's a good thing. Longer end of the curve, we're not going to be out there, but interest rates rose on the long end of the curve as well. So some good news, a little bit of a reprieve during the quarter as the Fed sort of signaled that they were going to be slowing the pace of interest rate increases. So again, that will lead to some good news here when we get to the performance of the portfolio. Briefly, on page 5, the chart on the left lets you see some of the various sectors that make up the fixed income world, and you can see that they are actually positive during the fourth quarter. Treasuries, agencies, you can't utilize asset-backed securities in Georgia nor corporates right now, but you can see how additive those particular sectors could be. But Treasury and agency saw positive returns during the quarter in what, again, was a rising rate environment on the short end of the curve. Let's not get into the weeds of the dot plot. We talked about the Fed. We think, and they kind of, this shows that they do anticipate being higher for longer. Let's get into what you really want to see, and that's some of the statistics of the portfolio. We'll focus on that upper left-hand corner first, where we have some portfolio statistics. You'll note that we ended the year at $24,576,000. If we fast forward to today, the portfolio now stands at about $24,854,000. So the market has continued to improve and help this portfolio. You'll note the duration of the portfolio at 2.47 years versus 2.48 years. Duration is a risk measure. It serves to show you the interest rate sensitivity of your portfolio. So when you think interest rates are going up, you want less interest rate sensitivity. When interest rates are going down, you want more interest rate sensitivity. Right now, we've been positioning your portfolio with less interest rate sensitivity because we think that interest rates are going to go higher from here, all right? So it's one way in which we try and reduce the overall risk of the portfolio. You'll note the yield at cost. So to put that into perspective, the yield at cost really serves as the income you would earn on this portfolio if you just held it until maturity, from this day forward until maturity, all right? So this number is, again, what you're truly earning in income in the portfolio. And the good news is that number has been ticking up. Over the past year, I'll just give you some numbers. The first quarter, that number stood at 0.67%. At the end of the second quarter, 0.88%. At the end of the third quarter, 1.12%. And then you see here 1.49. Today, it's at a 1.56%. So the bad news is this number doesn't reset as quickly as, say, a money market fund does, okay? But it is resetting as maturities occur, as income is received. It is resetting higher in this higher rate environment. And that's a good thing because you'll be locking in these yields for much longer than, say, a money market fund. So when interest rates do start to fall again, this portfolio is going to remain elevated from a yield standpoint relative to a money market fund. So that's the benefit of having a longer-term portfolio, and is the potential for maximizing yield and return relative to a money market fund, which resets much, much quicker. You can see it's a high credit quality portfolio, AA. We give you the breakdown in the lower left. It is a diversified portfolio, the sector allocation in the upper right. I talked about duration. We give you the duration distribution in that lower right-hand corner. So the blue bars are what makes up that 2.47 years. The gray bars make up that 2.48 years. So you'll note that the blue bar in that 0 to 1 year time frame is much larger than the benchmark. So that's saying that you have more in your portfolio coming due in the next year that we'll be able to invest out at higher yields and earn greater income in the portfolio. A lot of information there. Let me touch on the performance and then I'll stop and see what questions you might have, because again, I've thrown a lot at you. So looking at page 8, this is the performance slide. I'm going to focus towards the bottom. Again, we show you dollar return as well as percentage return. And this again is a total return portfolio, which means that it takes into account the interest earned as well as any changes in market value within the portfolio. And you'll note for the 3 months ending December 31st, the portfolio had a positive return. And I pause and mention this because it's been since the third quarter of 2021 that we've seen positive returns in fixed income portfolios. So this is kind of nice that Ryan waited until this quarter to bring me in front of you, that I get to bring a positive return to you. So I thank Ryan. So the portfolio was up 0.91%. We did slightly underperform the benchmark at 0.95%. And that's really, again, related to some of the agency exposure and mortgage-backed exposure we have in this portfolio relative to if you think back to that one chart where agencies did much better than, treasuries did much better than agencies during the quarter. So our diversification did work against us a little bit during the quarter. We also show you the fees and the net of fee return. So this portfolio returned net of fees about 0.88%, and just again slightly underperformed the benchmark. Now let's focus on the 1 year number. I talked earlier about how much interest rates went up during 2022, and that again is a negative for a long-term fixed income investor. However, I do want to note that we did outperform the benchmark on a gross and net of fee basis, 4.99% versus a negative 5.25%, and then after fees a negative 509 again versus that negative 525. So again, net of fees, we outperformed by we'll call it 15 basis points. It's hard to get excited about relative returns when there's that negative sign in front of it. I get that, but really that's one of our goals at the end of the day is to give back less than the market. You know, we talked earlier about the safety of principal being very liquid. You know, we want to give back less than the market. So we accomplished that over the past year. Bottom line, I think we are well positioned going forward. We think the majority of the pain in rising rates is behind us, and that the higher income should benefit the city greatly going forward. So we feel, again, like most of the bad news is behind us. We show you a quarter-over-quarter basis, you know, the same slide really on slide 9. I'm not going to go into that level of detail. We show you an issuer diversification on slide 10. The real takeaway is you're not in don't have any compliance issues from an individual issuer or sector allocation standpoint. I mentioned earlier high quality. You can see the quality breakdown here as well. So a very high quality portfolio. I've included a slide about us on 11 because I always say we're probably one of the larger investment managers that no one's ever heard of. We are responsible for over $200 billion in assets. Our bread and butter are clients just like you. Public entities make up about 98% of our client base. Institutional investments, investors only. We've been in business, as you see here, 42 years now. So we appreciate the partnership that we have with you and being entrusted to manage the city's assets. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. Any questions or comments from Elected body, yes. Councilmember Beeson?
Not sure if you'll be able to answer it. I'll throw it out there
I'll
anyways.
try my best. If I can, I'll get an answer for you.
Is there any way that we could possibly maximize or increase those returns at yield cost?
Yes, and so we're looking at a couple things that will do that. As we have income in the portfolio or we have pay downs in the portfolio, that money gets reinvested at higher yields, and that's going to serve that purpose, move the yield at cost higher. Additionally, with the portfolio, I talked about duration, and as time passes, duration gets shorter in a portfolio. And so this is an actively managed portfolio, so the portfolio manager will, from time to time, sell a security to lengthen the duration of the portfolio. And in this environment, what he's typically doing is selling something with a lower yield just because of the timing of when we put this money to work. So that money that he has to sell to lengthen the duration back in line with the benchmark will be reinvested at higher yields as well, and it'll go up. Thirdly, a cash infusion into the portfolio, which is something we're exploring now, and possibly moving some shorter-term money into this portfolio. We'd be putting that money to work at higher yields, and it would also move the yield at cost higher and quicker. So, does that help?
That does help. I appreciate your answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Councilmember Morthland.
The consumer price index is what moved the number recently, most recently. What are the other things that you're watching?
Yeah.
Unemployment reports. What are the other things that you're putting your mind around
So,
trigger points?
So you're right. CPI is a big one, and we got the 7th month in a row of a decrease in CPI. PCE is also another inflation measure that we focus on, as does the Fed. Fed's preferred gauge is PCE. We have a strategy committee that is looking at hundreds of things, really, at the end of the day. They're just, globally, they're looking at a number of data points. We're a relative value manager, so we're always looking at one sector relative to another. We're looking at, a lot of things that are out of our control, like political events or wars or those sorts of things, and how they may impact the domestic economy. So, following GDP, following employment, following what the Fed is doing, just any economic data point, we are following it and trying to formulate a strategy on how to best position our clients' portfolios. Does that help? I mean, there's a laundry list of things, really.
So that was leading into what I was going to kind of put the path out there on when a recession hits, whenever that may be.
Yeah.
24 months, 36 months, 10 years down, whatever the case may be. And
Yeah.
you get the warning signs that we're starting to head down that path.
They're there.
Are we
They're
jumping
there.
out of these mortgage-backed securities?
We actually really have just started to ease into mortgage-backed securities.
Because of the burn that took place?
You got it. It's just they haven't been attractive, and they're just starting to finally look attractive again. So right now, the unfortunate thing is the supply isn't there, because what interest rates have done, fewer people are buying homes. So there's less mortgage issuance, so therefore there's fewer mortgage-backed securities to buy. So we're not getting out, we're actually looking to get in.
When you see the tide is about to turn, then what would be your preferred method of investment at that point?
So again, the point I was trying to make earlier about timing the market and time in the market, we're really not going to do anything grossly different if we were to enter a recession. We're positioned right now, again, very conservatively, very high quality almost 3/4 of our portfolio is currently in Treasury. So at this point, we're not seeing a recession that looks overly ugly, but I wouldn't really change our strategy, again, greatly at this point, just because we already feel like you're in a very high quality and safe portfolio.
Right, no, that's fine. We're doing fine right now. That's-
In a recession, honestly, or some sort of event, whether it be here or abroad, probably would benefit this portfolio because of the high exposure in treasuries and agencies. Because what typically happens in those cases is a flight to quality. So the demand for the securities that you own, it goes up.
The one thing that was cueing in on what you were saying is when the recession hit last time, everybody was invested in mortgage and real estate.
Yes.
And everybody, as you went to the examiners and the auditors and you presented your argument to whatever their findings were as they were starting to downgrade, that was the exact same thing that they said to the auditors and to the examiners. This is high quality, this is good stuff, this is A paper.
Yeah.
And the A
Yeah.
paper gets thrown out the window as you start tanking.
Yeah,
Now,
yes.
not to get too down on you, but
No.
we're doing fine right now. But when those marks start coming up in the future, that's the only thing I'm asking is.
Yeah, so 07, 08 was a totally different environment. And you're right, mortgage market is what led us into recession, but the main reason was fraud. It was just absolute fraud. So people were rubber stamping, AAA on paper, like you said, not even exploring the underlying securities. The mortgage companies were giving loans to people without any paper, without any jobs. It was I'm trying to think of the term they used to use.
The ninja loan.
Ninja loan. No income, no job. Yeah.
No income, no asset.
Yeah.
So ninja loans in the creation of the appraisal management systems are supposed to be the benchmarks. So they're doing fine.
Yeah.
And, okay.
So what I was getting at there is I don't think we're in that environment anymore. So I don't think the mortgage market looks totally different than it did 10 years ago, 12 years ago.
The only thing that worries me is that we got white hot appraised values right now, and there's only one way to go down from white hot,
Yeah.
which led us down to our conversation. Thanks.
Agree. Well,
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right.
I will point out real quick, Mr.
Yes,
Knight,
please.
I just want to let everybody know that Mr. Stitcher is a new Roswell resident as of this past summer, so.
thanks. Yep. Appreciate it. As of June, I moved into Roswell.
Now things are looking up, the portfolio you moved in.
You're right. I bought at the top is what I did. That white hot prices, yeah, I got to partake in those.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Sir. Thank you. All right, we'll go to the presentation of the FY 2023 second quarter budget report. Mr. Luckett. And, Ms. Williams.
Hi, my name is Lynn Williams, and I'm the budget manager, and Brian has asked me to present today. So I will start us off kind of at the meat of the budget report. We do have a letter, and I'm going to talk through most of what's on that letter. This is our general fund, and we projected 58.5 million in revenue, and we collected 61.1 million. In our expenditure budget, we projected 48.2 million in expenditures, and we have spent 46 million. Our revenue is trending on target, and our expenditures are looking very well. I'll get into some of the actual categories now. So for property tax, this also includes the title ad valorem tax, And so the property tax is pretty on close to budget, but the title ad valorem on vehicles is still coming in fairly well. We do expect it to go down a little bit and maybe come up with the tax returns as people buy their cars using their tax return. But it did go down in January, which is not reflected here for December. But for the 6 months, it is ahead in TABT. For sales and use taxes, we have collected 1.1 million more than what we had expected for the first 6 months. This is showing the revised budgetary amount after the mid-year budget amendment. So the 30.6 there in budget includes that revision. The business taxes is on target currently. We should start to see business taxes come in. License and permits, that is building inspections and grading permits, and those have come in well this year. So most of that 300,000 there in variance from projected to actual is related to building and grading. I'm going to skip on down to fines and forfeitures. Most of that 188 is related to the school fines, which we did not budget in the budget and is related specifically, needs to be spent on police. So we will budget that as we come across. The investment earnings has done well with 100,000 more than we expected for the first 6 months. So coming on down into expenditures are the next two boxes. So salaries and benefits, we budgeted 6.63 million, and we spent roughly about half, 29 million. We're a little under projection. Some of that is in 300,000 is roughly in fire, about 200,000 in police, and then varying smaller amounts below that. For context, the fire department, when we added those 21 personnel, they went from spending roughly 130 to 150 in salary per month to 400 when they hired those other 21. So that variance is mostly just a timing. I don't feel like it's off. In operating, we did have about 800,000 in savings so far. About 100,000 of that is in communications. We are in the middle of our switch on our cell phones, and so that particular cost, we were seeing as we go into the new contract, we're seeing some credits along with the beginning of that contract. So we haven't started actually paying on that contract yet. So most of that savings relates to that. Machinery and equipment, and some other things like custodial repairs. Some of that relates to the market and that some of the items aren't coming in as fast as we would, because the market is a little slower to deliver on some of those items. Do we have any questions on general fund before I move on? This is really our meat and potatoes, and this is where most of the departments live, work, and so going into some of our other funds, water and sewer has its own revenue and its own expenses, so this is a separate fund. So we projected 2.9, we collected 2.9. Expenditure budget was 2.7 projected and 2 million in actuals. So as you can see with the bar chart below, and I had reported this back with the first quarter, the water and sewer fund, we did have that development going in, and we have collected all of the capacity fees that we would expect to see this year. So that is the large spike in revenue, and the rest of the year should be very good. Water and sewer expenditures, we are still looking at, I believe there's even a water line on this agenda. So solid waste fund, projected 6.3 million, and the actual for revenue is 6.3 million. The expenditure budget, we projected 6.9 million, and we actually spent 6.9 million. The projections, as you look across the months, solid waste is a fairly flat revenue, and the expenditures were a little over this particular month, that 367 variance. Most of that relates to the transfer station. It was a little different than what I had initially projected. Stormwater fund, this is the revenue of 2 million, and we collected 2 million. The expenditure budget was 1.7, and we collected 1.6. And so the stormwater fund is fairly flat revenue, and we did have some stormwater construction go on and was paid. So that's why you see a large spike in the expenditures for the month of December. So recreation participation fund, in this fund we had projected to collect 3.8, and we have collected more than that. So we have collected 4.5 million in revenue. Exactly. So in the expenditure side, when you collect more revenue in an activity-based fund like this, you do also spend a little bit more. So we projected 3.4 in year-to-date expenditures, and we've actually spent a little higher than that at 3.6, but we're still under our revenue number, so we're not under any concern here. Yes. So as you can see down here, the revenue does come in at different months, and a lot of that is determined with whenever we release the new schedule of classes, because they fill up fast lately. So, and then the expenditures. Yes, ma'am.
So for Parks and Rec, I'll use the bottom as an example. Do we recognize the revenue that's generated at the time that somebody registers? So for example, the summer months, we have camps, but you register normally March, April. Are we recognizing that when the camp actually happens, or when the activity actually happens, or do we recognize it at the time we receive?
The timing is adjusted by our accounting department. So if we collect the revenue in March, we do sometimes have a accounting adjustment, and that's why this first month is very high.
That's what I was trying to figure out. Okay.
Yes.
That explains it then. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So, all right, hotel motel. So we projected 643,000, and actual has come in at 765,000. So the hotels have been doing very well, and this is mainly a contracted, or the expenses here are transfers and spent on, we have it set up to be for Mimosa, and it's also CBB. E911 fund, this is for our police department. So we had projected 1.1 million in revenue, and we had 1.2 in actuals. The expenditures, we had projected about 1.6, and we did spend 1.4 million, so we had a little under there. So our revenues, because, and most of the E911 revenue goes to the Department of Revenue at the state, and then is sent on to us. The first 2 months, we don't see that. And then at the very end, you do recognize all of the revenue for the prior year, even after it continues to come in. So the shift on this one as well. But the month to month is looking very well for this. Any questions there before I move on? Okay. This is the T-SPOS 1 fund. So the T-SPOS 1 fund is no longer collecting direct taxes, but we do have interest being collected here. So we projected 187,000, and we collected year-to-date 581,000. The expenditures, we projected 825,000, and we have spent about 1.9. Because sometimes during the winter months, construction or anything tends to slow down, we had projected it pretty low, and they did have some expenditures come in, so that was just a timing issue for me. T-SPOS 2 is on the next page. So this T-SPOS 2, we had 9.9 million projected, and we have collected 10.7 million. So we have collected very well there. The expenditure budget, we projected 330,000, and we have spent 282,000, so under projection there. The revenue is doing very well all the way through December, being a large spending month. I would expect sales tax, or the T-SPOS portion of the sales tax to come in well. That's T-SPOS 2. On the back sheet, this is the top little section is the general fund that I already talked about. And then down through the left, you'll see all of the other funds and how they are doing.
All right, any questions for Mr. Luckett or Ms. Williams related to the first quarter budget report? Seeing none? Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, Councilmember Hills.
Clarify, Councilmember Beeson brought up a question. I'd already, excuse me, made a note on the solid waste expenditures. I know where we are on the transfer station, that there was going to be a, I don't know, I'm going to call it a kickback, but that's the wrong professional. There's a fee that's being charged back after the completion. Does that impact this? Like the penalty fee for not completing on time? Mm-hmm.
That has not been affected here because it's not in actuals yet.
Right, but that will impact the bottom line at the end.
It'll affect the bottom line on the actuals.
Okay. Do you know off the top of your head what, or is that, depends on their finish line, right?
It does depend. I have seen some paperwork on it, but I have not seen.
Yeah, I think it's still being worked out as the project is nearing completion.
It'll probably come to mayor and council.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Councilmember Beeson?
Related to the transfer station, do we have any revenue generating activities that'll be affiliated with the transfer station itself?
I believe that's the intent.
That's a Sharon question.
Long term. Sharon can address that.
Yeah, Ryan's correct. That is the intent down the line. We don't have anything set up currently. We're waiting for completion of the project before we pursue those.
Got it, thanks.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none. All right, thank you very much for your presentation. Item number 7, consideration to modify the service fee for credit debit card transactions.
Thank you, Mr. Knighton. This item is a consideration to modify the service fee for credit or debit card transactions. Just provide some background. As you might remember, due to the rising costs and merchant fees associated with our credit and debit card transactions, the mayor and council determined that those fees would no longer be absorbed by the city. So back in June, Mayor and Council approved a service fee of 2.5% for all in-house credit and debit card payments, excluding recreation and parks. That went into effect on July 1st, 2022. And just to kind of caveat that, a separate service fee of 3% was implemented by Recreation and Parks effective December 2022. And the main purpose behind the differing fees is because the different systems, our financial management system, RecTrack that they use, require different companies that we can use to process those credit card transactions, and that's kind of what led to that differentiation there. This was a chart we showed you back in the summer just to give you a reminder of kind of what we were looking at in terms of the fees the city was paying for associated with debit and credit card transactions. Back in 2021, over $500,000, and we were projecting that to go over $600,000 in the coming year. So the current status, so there have been some challenges that we've experienced with our financial management system in getting that fee working correctly, but it has worked generally well for the city, and we've been charging the fee since July 1st of 2022. However, recently, the city's merchant services provider has determined that the current service fee that we're charging is not enough to cover their cost, and they're requesting an increase from 2.5% to 3%. So I'm going to go into some detail about why that is. As you may or may not know, there are a lot of rules and regulations from the credit card companies when it comes to, the ability to even charge a service fee, what's allowable, when and where we can actually charge it. During the implementation, the initial implementation, our merchant services provider, along with us as the city, the credit card processor, we took a look at prior year history. So we looked at the prior years of, what is the volume of transactions that we're seeing, what were the merchant fees that we were paying, and we use that information to help determine what service fee would be necessary to cover the cost of the merchant fees. So the goal of that effort was to determine what the right fee was to cover the cost, but to keep it as low as possible for the customer. And there's actually, and when it comes to the rules of the credit card companies, obviously we're not really allowed to go above and beyond what just covers the cost. But that was the intent in coming up with that percent. Implementing the service fee was a new process for us as a city, as well as the merchant services provider that we use. And a key cost that was unknown at the time was excluded from the analysis that we used to determine the appropriate service fee. And so as a result of that, the city has been fined, but our merchant services provider has earned minimal to no fees, and has at time absorbed losses since July 1st of 2022. And you may ask yourself, why are we just now talking about this? They have been doing their best to work with a credit card processor to see if there are other options that could be adjusted, that they could work through so that they were earning what they needed to earn in this process. And through all of their efforts and due diligence, it was really the last month that they came to us and said, we've done all that we can do and we need to make a change. Just to provide kind of an example of what led to this. So if you think about a utility bill transaction, just as an example, so the way that it works is that as part of that overall transaction, we're talking one transaction, but on the back side, you have a merchant ID, one merchant ID that basically charges the cost of the city services. Through that process, the credit card is charged for the city services, and those fees are sent directly to the city, and there are merchant fees associated with that portion of the transaction. What was unknown at the time was that on this separate merchant ID, where the credit card service fee is charged, that there are actually fees associated with that transaction as well. So we knew about, it's a small portion, and we're talking 2.5%. If you think about, a utility bill of $30, 2.5% is not a lot of money. But when you aggregate that over all of our customers, it's a sizable portion. And so, like this shows, we were accounting for the merchant fees associated with the main transaction. What was not known at the time was that there would be merchant fees associated with the service fee transaction. Just to give you a little bit of background too, when you think about transaction fees that are charged on credit card transactions, there's several different ones. You can see the bulk of the fee is the interchange fee, and that is the fee that goes to the banks that issue the cards for the risk they take in issuing cards to users. There's the network fee. That fee goes to the Visa, MasterCard, the credit card companies. And then that portion of the top, the processor fee, is what is used or what is received by the merchant services provider for all of their work as part of this process. So our recommendation is to implement a revised service fee of 3% effective March 1st of 2023. We have thought about alternatives, and to be honest with you, I don't think there really are alternatives, because any merchant services provider that's going to come in and see the cost associated with the transactions that we're talking about is going to have the same result. I will kind of point out to you, this is some other information that we talked about back during the summer. What other cities around us are doing. You can see, we knew that Alpharetta is absorbing most of their credit card fees, but Johns Creek passes the fees on to the customer ranging from 3.5% to 5%. Milton's at 3%, Sandy Springs, it varies, but court fines, for example, are at 5%. And I think another good example is the fact that the process with our recreation and park transactions also ended up at 3%. So I think our merchant services provider was, as I mentioned, that key cost component was left out. They were also trying to do their best to limit the service fee that we were having to charge. I'll also point out, just as a reminder, all the payment methods that exist today that are no-cost alternatives. That includes automatic bank draft for utilities, bank bill pay for utilities and property taxes, of course, cash or check. So with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Questions? Councilmember Morthland.
Do we have a contract with this merchant servicer? Or are we month to month on the agreement?
It's a merchant services provider that has been with the city for quite a long time, and I would have to look into that.
Well, for the record, I mean, 3% is pretty much understandable. That goes without saying. So we'll take our net gain as we can.
Councilmember Beeson.
So to clarify, across the board now, instead of Parks and Rec being separate from these, it would just be 3% across the board?
Correct. The only difference in that would be if we use a separate vendor. When I mentioned before in-house credit and debit card payments, we have a vendor that manages our IVR system, our payment by phone, and so they are charging, that's based on whatever they charge. It's separate from this, and that's part of their contract. So there's some things like that outside of our control where it may vary a little bit, but anytime someone pays in a city, things that we control will be 3%. So.
Any other questions or comments from Mayor and Council or Council? All right, seeing none, we would need to move this item forward, correct? We have a motion to move this item forward. Motion, Councilmember Hills. Second, Councilmember Beeson. Any further comment or question? Seeing none, all in favor? All right, thank you very much. All right, and then item number 8, of course, was deferred. We'll move to Recreation and Parks. We have an addendum item. Item number 9, consideration for approval of staff's recommendations on replacement of 2 existing rectangular artificial turf fields at East Roswell Park. Mr. Leatherman.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. All right, there's a handful of slides associated with our artificial turf replacement. I'm not going to go through all the individual slides. I'm going to hit the highlights, and then if there's any questions towards the end, I'd be happy, of course, to entertain those. We have the artificial turf fields. One of them was authorized at East Roswell Park during our fiscal year 23 budget. Obviously, in November, we had our voters approve the bond measure, which then authorized additional funding. Our recommendation is to couple those 2 projects together to get both fields at East Roswell Park done at the same time, and use a contract that we have available to us to be able to do it here in the spring, so that it's done before we go into the summer season. What we're asking for tonight is 2 parts. We want to walk you through the turf selection that we've made, as well as some infield mix that we're recommending associated with this, as well as move the project forward so that we can present that contract to you at your next available council meeting. We've gone through a couple of meetings with the Recreation Commission looking at different options, and you'll see at the end in the presentation where we've landed on our recommendation. Just a couple of notes. We have some great staff, obviously, within the city of Roswell, and our turf knowledge base is no exception to that. We have 3 members of our Recreation and Park team that have a tremendous amount of experience within the turf and turf management realm. That includes Kyle Patterson, Nick Pasurcia, and a new staff member, Jared Kent, who we just hired recently. As we continue to hire great talented people, they bring a wealth of experience with them. As we start to look at our current field status, it's really about the age of the equipment and the material, and then the resilience of that material as it relates to safety. The Gmax value that you see at the very top is the maximum value that's allowed before corrective measures must be taken. So all of our fields currently are safe to play based on this standard, and we do have those tested on an annual basis. But the turf itself is starting to wear out, which we've talked about on a number of conversations. Again, some of our observations as we continue to do our due diligence in monitoring our fields. As we look at the replacement for turf fields, we're looking for a turf that's durable, that's safe, and then also is cost effective based on our needs in the community. You have three basic turf types: monofilament, slip film, and the hybrid. They all have a varying, based on the manufacturer, various types of actual quality. Higher quality is going to last based on the wear fiber tests that are done in a lab. Some of the others aren't going to last quite as long, and so that's a factor that we take in to the system. Once you select the actual turf type, meaning the blades of the grass, then you have to really look into what type of layering system, whether it's a sand system, an organic material, or the crumb rubber. You have a 2-layer option or a 3-layer option. We're recommending a 3-layer option, and I'll explain why. When you talk about alternative infield materials, there is a whole industry that is starting to develop a variety of different options. You can do cork options, coconut, olive, cork composite, all the way through to your traditional sand, crumb rubber, and for us, we're going to be recommending the Cool Play mix, which is there at the top, which I'll also explain why. As we're starting to see some of the organic material, just to describe some of the challenges with those. In some cases, you have to replace that organic material every 2 years, cost you about an extra $15,000, an example for the coconut infill. In some cases, Georgia Tech recently installed some coconut infill, and they're having some disadvantages with those, especially when it rains. They start to float to the top of the surface, and they've got to respread them. And so a number of challenges have started to come up with some of those organic materials, especially in areas where they potentially start to break down, and you have to install pesticides on top of those fields in order to manage organic growth associated with them. So as we put this together, what does it all mean? Essentially, you've got to select the right type of turf for your needs. You'll see the monofilament, which is the red line. That's usually what you're going to see on high-performing fields such as the NFL fields, MLS soccer fields. They replace their turf fields about every 2 to 3 years. It looks great on TV, performs great for a few years, and then they pull them out when they start to see degradation to the actual material. The slip film, which is what we're recommending as part of our turf, is the pink line there. That's going to give you the best look and playable surface, and also going to be the most durable and last the longest over the period of about a 10-year to 12-year cycle. This is just some examples of some turf that we went and took a look at other parks around the community. And this is our turf. It's been there for about 10 to 12 years. You'll see a significant amount of the crumb rubber, and we're going to go over why that is in this case, which we're going to change with our new installation. And this is why. When we installed our fields, the crumb rubber was 100% installed in those fields. And so when you see the black in our fields, that is because we installed them with 100% crumb rubber. The new technology and the new kind of layering system allows you to use a crumb rubber and silica sand option. That starts to decrease the amount of rubber that you're placing on the fields. It continues to be resilient in how the field performs. And then you also have a 3-layer system, which is actually what we're recommending, where you have a sand, crumb rubber, and sand option. That starts to lock those rubber pieces in so that they don't spread as much. They don't end up in your cleats, in your car, hopefully in your garage as often. And then that top layer that you see between the 90 and the 100%, that's an option where you can install the Cool Play mix. What that does is another material that we can put on top of the sand and decreases the temperatures of the fields about 25 to 30% based on the manufacturer's recommendations and advice. A lot of things are going to factor into that: direction of the sun, how shaded the field is, how hot the environment is where you're going to see whether that temperature truly does get a 20 to 30% degree change. I will tell you from spending a lot of time out on our fields and facilities with my kids out there playing. Any temperature decrease that we can get is going to be a benefit. It does come at a cost. Each of the fields is roughly about an additional $50,000 to install that cool play mix on the top. So how we put all this together, what we're recommending on our turf system is the cool play on the top, which is a 3-layer sand and chrome rubber mix with the cool play additive on top of, let me get to the end, the classic HD, which is a slip film fiber. Putting all 3 of those components together, we think we're going to get the maximum benefit, use of our fields and facilities, the right infield mix, and also work on dropping the temperature. This will allow us to test that cool play on these 2 fields. Hopefully we'll continue to install that if we see good results at the fields coming with the bond implementation over the next few months and into next year. Total cost for replacement of the fields, including the fencing, is about $600,000 per field. And we've got a contracting method that we can use through a consortium contract that will allow us to leverage those already bid contracts and issue the PO a little bit quicker and get this done here in the spring. So I ran through a lot of information really quick, but be happy to answer any questions should you have them.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mr. Leatherman, for the detailed presentation. And so I just wanted to share some comments. And so first off, too, so when you say sand, though, it sounds like it's not actual sand. What is it exactly?
It's like a silica sand mix.
So what's silica sand mix? What's that mean?
Taylor, do you have that, how that's broken down? Come on up.
Primarily, my understanding is the clarification is sand.
Is actual sand. Okay, excellent, thank you. So that's helpful. That's what I thought when originally reading it, so I'm glad to hear that it sounds like that's the case. So this came up in discussion a lot, actually, a number of years ago, and just a lot of aspects on kind of different concerns around the artificial fields and that crumb rubber that to your point ends up in everybody's shoes and in kids' mouths, despite, obviously very unhealthy stuff and everything like that. When reading through this, though, back then, this was a number of years ago, a lot of the discussion was on the cork and the coconut, which were really intriguing. But I was hearing from Mr. Leatherman and seeing in the presentation of just some of the challenges, like including the seeing where it even mentioned it, just basically floating away. You described so that obviously years ago that was earlier. There wasn't that discussion, but obviously we do need fields that are lasting and working for the kids. In reality, the way I read the Pure Select Olive, I think that's really interesting. I do understand the concern with the urgency on this and the limited install history, but that one being taking away any of the potential health challenges, other concerns and stuff like that. Ultimately, tonight, I will be supporting staff's recommendation. So I do know that those 2 fields at East Roswell Park are way, way overdue. And so I do support staff coming here tonight with this urgency to really improve that. I will say for a larger discussion as we look with the bond and other stuff, I still am intrigued and curious to hear more about Olive. But more importantly, and as discussed, I'm supporting this tonight because this is replacing existing turf fields that are just way overdue. The irony is, there's not the tears that you have at East Roswell Park, but even at Groveway, where I was last night when Mr. Leatherman gave me a call literally 5 minutes after a resident that I had just met, complaining about just how it's not supposed to look like that. It's not supposed to just be the crumb rubber balls all over the place, all that. When we get into discussion regarding some of the actual grass fields, and I know staff's wanting to consider seeing if we'd support turning some of those into artificial turf. I absolutely believe that to have the best parks and to be the #1 family community, it involves still not only having turf fields, like we absolutely do have a lot of, but also having natural grass fields. And so I'd really like this council and staff to look at the consideration, instead of using the money to rip out the grass and turn it into turf, that instead we look at actually just investing more into the drainage and finding ways just to help improve the drainage, because everything that I've seen and heard from speaking to the different people is the #1 thing that people do like about the turf is it is better with the rain and better with from a drainage standpoint. So I'd like to see if there's ways we can improve the grass with that, and then as for compared to the artificial turf, feedback I get and see from parents all the time is, of course, the crumb rubber balls, just the pain of them, the health questions, the heat, which this might be improving, because we get to the point during the summer where for the little kids, the lower Groveway fields are too hot, so they'd basically have no choice but to move them over to the grass just to practice, because the heat being unbearable, as well as even just from a joint standpoint of running on the actual natural dirt and grass, having some advantages as well. So that was really more for staff and for this council, just to be aware of the discussion I want us to have when we start talking about existing natural grass fields and the push to try to improve the drainage. But again, that being said, I do know that East Roswell Park is way overdue for these two fields, and this what staff's recommending here is certainly better, much better than what's currently there now, and frankly, what staff's presenting tonight is much better than what's at the lower Groveway artificial turf fields today. So again, I'm supporting this tonight and at council.
Thank you. Councilmember Vanstrom.
Just curious, again, this is going to be completed by when, and then are we going to be, obviously with the bond referendum and what Councilman Palermo was talking about as discussions going forward, will this be installed in time for us to be experiencing it and getting some feedback?
Yes.
Before we move into any other fields?
Thank you. Yeah, the reason that we're bringing this forward now is we're targeting a completion date of June 1. And the window that we have right now, the opportunity window, I will say, is as soon as the high school is shut down, that's when they start doing their massive turf replacements. And so we can catch the spring season before the high school is shut down and start replacing mostly their football and soccer fields. And then that, if we wait, then that we're potentially delayed into August and September when those high school fields are done. To your point, Councilmember, it also gives us, and to Councilmember Palermo's point, gives us the ability to really test this system on fields 1 and 2 at East Roswell, take an understanding of the investment for the temperature reduction and how that plays out in our existing environment, and whether or not it's something we would want to continue to install in similar circumstances throughout the city's turf field, as well as looking at other infield mixes that potentially have some similar playable surfaces and what the cost-benefit ratio is for those. So we'll be able to do all of that as we work our way through bond implementation and the schedule associated with that as well.
Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Palermo.
Great point. Just for clarification with that, I'm guessing that when this is first installed, it's going to look absolutely incredible and feel absolutely incredible. And a part of my position is just more of the long term. Ultimately, the grass at Sweet Apple and the grass at Woodstock Soccer Complex, that's been there a long time, and it's fantastic. It's such a great place for the kids playing soccer and all that. Whereas in the lower Groveway, it's just again, if it's been pouring rain, there's advantages to it. But if there's not been, that over many years, it's grass. Obviously, it takes some maintenance, but grass is grass versus we're witnessing here the fact that East Roswell is most urgent. But again, we're not even talking about the lower Groveway ones right now, which certainly a lot of residents are talking about. So my concern is not how awesome I think this will look once this is installed, but 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, et cetera, down the road versus the natural turf.
Yeah, and I brought this picture up just because this is a 7-year field. So Bell Memorial Park's been installed for about 7 years, very similar system to what we're recommending. And that gives you a sense of how that facility is performing as compared to our existing facility. So totally agree. I hope that helps.
Councilmember Morthland.
You gave us a date at the beginning or somewhere in that presentation around when this would be finished, completed. What was that date?
June 1.
So are we missing any of the spring season with the kids' soccer and football? What's the plan
So,
there?
yeah, we'll be rescheduling around the existing spring season. The other kind of target in this case is spring season is a little bit lighter because we don't have football on our fields for fall football. And so we're able to get these installed in preparation for that fall season where we have a lot more impact on our large fields. Usually have football, soccer, and lacrosse in the fall season all happening on the same fields at the same time. So targeting the spring is a little bit easier from a scheduling perspective to move those games and also those practices around. And we're actually planning for that now and scheduling lighter practice schedules and lighter game schedules already at East Roswell Park just in preparation for this opportunity.
So as we communicate with the residents, we're informing them that both of these fields are going at the same time. We're not doing one and then turn around doing the other.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll be able to knock them out in a pretty short window. The advantage here is once we get the go-ahead from a contracting perspective, it takes them about a month, so the carpet, then they'll stage, and then they'll do the construction all at the same time. You'll have all the equipment there, and we'll be able to get it done.
Councilmember Beeson.
Question you may or may not be able to answer at this time. As it relates to the pool play, do you know where the rubber infill is sourced from?
No, I do not. It is a recycled turf material, and then there's an organic component that is installed with it in order to make it, but I don't know exactly where it's sourced from.
I do know there's a couple of health concerns with whenever you source the rubber crumb from recycled tires, just because there's environmental components that you don't necessarily want kids playing on. People still put it on playgrounds. And then secondarily, related to that question with the sand infill, given that it's a silica sand, we don't by any chance know the micron size of the silica sand, do we?
We can track it down.
Just because there's newer OSHA guidances on silicate exposures.
Sure.
And with kids, I want to make sure that's a non-respirable micron.
Got it.
Thanks.
We'll track it down before it comes to council.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Palermo.
And I just want to mention to Councilmember Beeson's points regarding the crumb rubber, because that is where it was sourced. That was where, about 6 or 7 years ago, this was a big discussion in the city, and that being the concerns, especially when you have the smallest children closest to the ground, falling over, not being able to control what's going in their mouth.
I have a kitty kicker, so
Yes.
I have a 3-year-old, so I'm very intimately familiar with the crumb rubber in ways I did not want to be.
Yeah, and that's a big part of, again, going back to the discussions 6 and 7 years ago when a lot of residents were involved in that discussion is one of many reasons I'm certainly advocating that for grass fields, we look at improving the drainage versus moving to that direction. But as for replacing this one that's already crumb rubber anyways, I am glad to see there's a lot more sand versus all crumb rubber. But at that council meeting, I will be curious to hear the answer to Councilmember Beeson's question, and I'll certainly be requesting this is not on the consent agenda.
All right, any further questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we'll ask for a motion to move this item forward. Motion by Councilmember Morthland, second by Councilmember Hills. Any further discussion with the notation that it not be placed on consent agenda? Is that is consistent with your motions? And second? Good, thumbs up, yes, all right. Okay, all right, the motion in second. Do we have any further discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Passes unanimously. Excuse me. All right, we'll entertain for the Administration and Finance and Recreation and Parks Committee. That concludes our agenda. We'll entertain a motion of adjournment. Motion by Councilmember Vanstrom, second by Councilmember Hills. All in favor? All right. We will quickly transition then to the Public Safety and Public Works Committee meeting, and for the record, I'll pause for a moment. Good, all right. We'll move forward. Good afternoon and welcome to the Public Safety and Public Works Committee meeting for February 14, 2023. Council members present, Councilmember Michael Palermo, Councilmember Peter Vanstrom, Councilmember Sarah Beeson, Councilmember G. Lee Hills, Councilmember William Morthland. The purpose of committee meetings are for city departments to convey information to the mayor and city council and discuss initiatives listed on the published agenda. By ordinance, the committee consists of the mayor and council, as well as the city administrator, and the city administrator serves as chair of committee meetings. This is a public meeting, but not a public hearing. Therefore, while the meeting is open to the public, we do not take public comments or questions unless specifically authorized by mayor and council. Public comments or questions are received on the second and fourth Monday of each month, regular city council meetings at 7:00 p.m., and at the fifth Monday of each month in open forum. We do encourage citizens to engage our online platforms, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to our staff who are available to provide those answers and responses to you. We also encourage you to visit the city website and also the Roswell City app and web service portal to report any concerns or issues. The first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes for the Public Safety and Public Works Committee meeting for January 10th, 2023. Motion by Councilmember Banstrom, second by Councilmember Hills. Any further discussion on approval of the minutes? All in favor? Passes unanimously. All right. We will note that under Public Safety Fire, we do not have any action items for this evening. Under Public Safety Police, no action items for the evening. Under Public Works, item number 2, consideration for the mayor and/or city administrator to sign a contract with Gradeco Incorporated for the Tuxedo Court waterline replacement project for an amount not to exceed $257,075. Ms. Izo.
Thank you very much. Good evening. This is a project to replace a water line with a new 8-inch ductile water line. The project is partially funded from CDBG funds allocated in 2021, and the balance will be coming out of the water utility. We had 3 bids, and the low bid was to Gradeco, one of our standby contractors who has done work for us in the past and has always done a great job. Here to answer any questions you'd like to ask.
Motion to move forward?
Motion by Councilmember Palermo, second by Councilmember Beeson. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Item number 3 is an addendum item, consideration to establish a capital improvements program, CIP Program Management Division, in the Environmental Public Works Department for the purpose of delivering the city's capital improvement projects, including those identified as part of the 2022 bond referendum. Ms. Izo.
I'm delighted to be here asking you to establish this division within Environmental Public Works. As you know, we do a fair bit of design and construction work for the city of Roswell and have a strong background to be able to support the bond projects that were approved in November. We are looking to hire a few folks to help us do that, and the intention is for this group to be able to provide program management for the delivery of these CIP projects that are non-transportation from concept through design, construction, and startup. The division would be responsible to help ensure that these projects are delivered in a timely way and within budget. The division will initially consist of 3 full-time positions. The first would be a CIP program manager, and this position will oversee all aspects of CIP project delivery. This position is going to be reclassified from an existing position in the Rec and Parks Department, a project manager position. The second 2 positions would be newly created full-time positions. The first would be a CIP project coordinator who would support the management of CIP delivery. And the third would be a CIP construction administrator, which is a different skill set, if you will, someone who would be specialized in the construction aspects of CIP delivery with respect to scope, schedule, and budget, and managing all the documentation that goes along with the construction project. Those would be newly created positions, and those would be funded out of our bond proceeds, and Ryan has provided an explanation for you as far as the financials go. Lastly, as a part of this reorganization, establishing this division within Environmental Public Works, we are recommending that Fleet Services be moved from Environmental Public Works into the Administration Department, which is home to the other divisions that provide internal services to all city departments. Happy to answer any questions.
All right. Yes. Councilmember Vanstrom?
Just curious, you call those 2 positions full-time,
Yes, sir.
but are the positions only for the duration necessary for the implementation of the bond and through those dates?
The expectation is that we're going to be reviewing all projects that come through the city, not just the bond projects, all capital improvement projects, and that this group would be empowered to take on those projects that get a little, I'll call them hairier, the ones that have some inherent risks involved in them that require a little more sophisticated approach to project management. So this group will also be taking on projects that are funded outside of the bond. So the expectation is that they will be here for the future, even beyond our bond projects.
All right, any further question or comment? Yes, Councilmember Beeson?
Just for the sake of clarity, so this came out of the discussion from our retreat over the past week, is that correct?
Absolutely, yes.
So to kind of brief anybody who's watching this, I'd say the public, I think we have 2 members of the public here right now. This proposal, which is why you're not hearing a whole lot of questions from council right now, came from a discussion over the last couple of days when we were in Alabama for our retreat, and it was essentially trying to tackle some of the more unwieldy staff concerns of how we're going to tackle these bonds in a timely manner, how we're going to manage these projects, and to try to provide the city of Roswell with a way to have a more in-house but more controlled way of going about it. So that's where this came from. It's not a surprise to anyone sitting at this table. Thanks.
Yes, Councilmember Morthland.
Are we going to attempt to hire this ourselves, or are we going through a search firm? What are we doing here?
At this point, our plan would be to go through our normal hiring process.
Okay. 30-day scenario, hopefully we get somebody in and, we're off and running. It's very important that, in my opinion, it's very important we get these folks in because they are going to be integral to getting the bond projects where they need to be. So this is great.
Thank you, sir. Yes, Councilmember Palermo.
Yeah, I agree with Councilman Morthland's point. I think this is a very urgent priority.
All right, thank you. Yes, Councilmember Vanstrom.
You're hiring positions to help with the bond referendum, and does this preclude bringing any further specialty services from any consultant firms into the future?
I appreciate the question, Councilmember Venstrom. In addition to the folks that are going to be here in-house managing the bond projects, we are going to be putting out an RFQ for qualifications for a program management firm to come in and support our efforts, because to your point, we don't necessarily want to hire all of that expertise in, and then once we get through our bond projects, have those folks having to look for a new home. So these folks will be managing from in-house, and then we will have a firm that'll also be working under contract with us with the kind of specialties and expertise that we need to cover the full gamut of the bond, which, as you know, really is a full range of projects above and beyond what we typically handle in-house.
All right. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to move this item forward. Motion by Councilmember Morthland, second by Councilmember Hills. Any further discussion? I'm sorry, yes, Councilmember
Just a
Vanstrom.
thank you to Sharon and her team for taking this on. You guys have stepped forward and accepted quite a challenge. We began the conversations, as Sarah mentioned. It just showed, just talking about it at our retreat, how involved this is going to be and how on top of it you guys already are, and how specific you will be in making sure that this is all implemented in the safest and most expedient manner. So thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any further comment or question? I believe we had a motion and a second. All right, any further comment or question? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you, passes unanimously. And that does conclude the Public Safety and Public Works Committee meeting for February 14th, 2023. We'll entertain a motion for adjournment. Motion by Councilmember Beeson, second by Councilmember Morthland. All in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much.